Brazil declared war on Germany and Italy on August 22, 1942, because in that same week, 5 Brazilian ships were sunk, resulting in about 600 casualties. Despite the well-known Axis offensive against our coasts and the worsening of our relations with those countries, many people still tend to say that it was the Americans who secretly sank our ships to drag us into World War II. This barroom story still persists despite the lack of evidence. So today we're going to dive deep, sorry for the pun, to find out who really sank the Brazilian ships in World War II. During the 1930s, Brazil was gradually recovering from the massive drop in coffee prices that came as a result of the stock market crash in 1929. Getulio Vargas, upon taking power in Brazil in 1930, ended the government's historic ties with the agrarian elites of Minas Gerais and São Paulo, establishing industrialization and the strengthening of commerce as major goals for Brazil's growth. However, he needs foreign trade partners to supply Brazil with machinery and industrial products. The only issue was Brazil's poverty. When I say poor, I mean Brazil lacked gold, which was the global trade standard then. A new scenario emerged in 1933 when Hitler took power in Germany and rapidly reindustrialized the country. Brazil unexpectedly faced a new situation when Germany offered it the so-called American Standard Code for Information Interchange Mark, Auslanders on the continent of Europe, or the Foreign Trade Compensation System. This system allowed for large amounts of international purchases, even if the country didn't have a large amount of gold. The Bank of Brazil would open an account at the Reichsbank and vice versa. A Brazilian buyer could select trucks from the German catalog and pay in the national currency. This currency was converted into credit that reached Germany. In Germany, if a merchant wanted to buy wool, coffee, or Brazilian raw materials, he would pay in the national currency, and that was deducted from the credits that Germany had. In this way, the two countries ended up greatly increasing their bilateral trade relationship. Vargas considered the American Standard Code for Information Interchange System fundamental for Brazilian economic development, and despite protests from the American embassy, he never did anything to put an end to the system. As early as December 1936, the New York Times itself headlined that Germany had surpassed the United States as Brazil's top trading partner, precisely because of the American Standard Code for Information Interchange Mark. And that's why, when the war started with Germany as the main partner, Vargas maintained a neutral position, not wanting to upset anyone, although he was very clever and knew that with the war situation, trade with Germany was almost doomed, because he knew that the British Navy would quickly blockade the Atlantic. He didn't want to upset the Germans because he didn't know how the conflict would end. At the same time, he recognized the hemispheric primacy of the United States as a great power, so he worked to strengthen relations with that country. Things became more complicated in June 1940, after Germany's victory over France, which greatly increased Hitler's prestige in the region. But the following month, July 21-30, 1940, the second meeting of American foreign ministers was held in Havana, Cuba. The country, represented by Foreign Minister Oswaldo Arana, signed a mutual protection treaty with other continental countries against external aggression. At the same time, the United States also signed a treaty with Brazil to buy 100% of all our raw material exports. To prevent any kind of supply from being sent to Germany or Italy, Getulio Vargas was quite pleased with this situation, and our relations with Germany dropped drastically. On March 22, 1941, Brazil suffered its first attack in the war. The ship Taubaté, which was sailing in the eastern Mediterranean from Cyprus to Alexandria, was bombed by the Luftwaffe. Testimony from its captain, Mario Fonseca Tinoco, said that the ship had the Brazilian flag painted on both sides of the hull, and that he himself had raised the white flag on the main mast. The German plane kept strafing the ship. The attack did not end up sinking the Taubaté, but it resulted in the death of the first Brazilian, in World War II, the sailor José Francisco Fraga, who was strafed on the deck. Brazilian crew members reported the attack to their consulate in Alexandria, and the Foreign Ministry in Rio de Janeiro asked the German embassy for clarification, which remained completely silent. Since September 1940, the United States had been expanding its territorial presence on the American continent. They signed an agreement with the United Kingdom to obtain bases in the Caribbean, Guyana, and Newfoundland. In June 1941, they occupied Iceland, and in July they reached an agreement with Brazil to use the bases at Recife and Natal for anti-submarine warfare. During this time, Brazil was already working with the United States, supplying raw materials for the war, especially the crucial rubber needed for the Lend-Lease program. The Lend-Lease program, which began in March 1941 to supply war material, was already fully underway at this time, supplying weapons to the United Kingdom and now the Soviet Union. In this situation, the Americans were supplying weapons to their major enemies and also to Brazil. Hitler realized that after the United States entered World War II following Pearl Harbor, weapons production would rapidly increase. He used this reason to declare war on the United States on December 11 and immediately begin attacks on their maritime supply routes. And since a large part of these supply lines passed through Brazil, our coastline ended up becoming a priority target for the Germans. Between January 15 and 28, 1942, the third meeting of American foreign ministers took place in Rio de Janeiro. On the last day of the event, Oswaldo Aranha announced the breaking of relations between Brazil and the Axis powers. This action was answered by Berlin and Rome with authorization to turn Brazilian ships into high-priority targets. This occurred during Germany's first action against the United States, Operation Paukenschlag, Drumbeat, in February 1942. The first Brazilian ships were sunk near Virginia's coast in the United States. The cargo ship Buarque was sunk on February 15, 1942, and the Olinda 3 days later, both by the German submarine U-432, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Heinz Otto Schütze. It's important for us to note that this submarine effort against Brazil wasn't a grudge Germany had against our country, but rather a coordinated naval effort by the Axis. That's right, I said Germany and Italy. Admit it. You're enjoying this video, aren't you? If you are, then give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. There's still a lot of good stuff coming up. The Regia Marina, the Italian Navy, although trapped in the Mediterranean by both ends, controlled by England, managed to get several of its large ocean-going submarines through Gibraltar and secure a base in Bordeaux, France to operate them. This was the Beta-Sum, or Bordeaux Sommet Ghibli, commanded by Admiral Angelo Perona, who reported directly to Karl Dönitz in Berlin. In this way, it's not at all strange that the next Brazilian ship sunk. The Cabedelo in the North Atlantic was sunk by the submarine Da Vinci, commanded by Captain Gianfranco Gazzana Priaroggia. On February 25th, this sinking, in fact, was the first to result in a large number of casualties. 54 people, the entire crew of the Cabedelo. After that, the sinkings of Brazilian ships continued steadily, always in the North America or Caribbean sector. This continued until May 18, when the Italian submarine Barbarigo, led by Captain Enzo Grossi, torpedoed the Brazilian ship Comandante Lira near Rio Grande do Norte. While the ship didn't sink, it raised the alarm about enemy submarines off our coast, and this made the Brazilian Air Force, without any fanfare, start armed patrols against these vessels. 4 days later, on May 22, a Brazilian Air Force B-25, led by Captain Osvaldo Barbarigo, who later joined Santa Pua in Italy as a fighter pilot, spotted the Barbarigo and attacked immediately. That would be the first Brazilian action in World War II. Even with the country still officially neutral, Pamplona made a pass 300 meters from the submarine and dropped 10 45-kilogram bombs. Enzo Grossi fired back with his deck gun machine guns. Pamplona kept visual contact with the submarine and reported its position by radio, later returning to base. The Minister of Aeronautics, Salgado Filho, told the press that Brazilian aircraft were attacking Axis submarines off our coast. This fact was seen by Berlin as an informal declaration of war by Brazil against Germany. Now, we come to the main point, the sinkings of August 1942, which decisively led Getulio Vargas to declare war on Germany and Italy. This is where conspiracy theorists claim the sinkings were American black ops to draw Brazil into the war. By August 1942, Brazil was already cooperating fully with the United States. We supplied raw materials and they used our bases. The cultural exchange between the two countries was strong. Walt Disney visited Rio de Janeiro, where he created Zeckler and Carioca, a Brazilian character, specifically designed to win our sympathy. But that's okay. Let's focus on the main issue, the sinkings of August 16 and 17, 1942. It all begins when U-507, a Type IXC ocean-going submarine, leaves the French port of Lorient for its third patrol under the command of Corvette Captain Haro Schacht on July 4th, 1942. On August 7th, after failing to patrol the Central Atlantic, he radioed Berlin for authorization to patrol the Brazilian coast. The next day, authorization arrived instructing him to go to Recife, headquarters of the American Fourth Fleet. What happens next is still a bit unclear, because Chart did not go to Recife. He disobeyed orders and sailed to the northern coast of Bahia, where at 12 minutes past midnight on August 16th, he torpedoed with 2 torpedoes the ship Baipendi. The Baipendi was sailing with its lights off just 20 miles from our coast and had a total of 306 people on board. Among them were 16 officers and 125 enlisted men from the 7th Pack Artillery Group, being transferred from Rio de Janeiro to Recife. The 2 torpedoes it fired at the Baipendi hit the side of the ship directly. It sank in less than 5 minutes, taking 270 people with it. It's quite curious that Chart attacked the Baipendi, a ship that was sailing in the coastal area and was carrying a Brazilian military group. This may suggest a leak of information from the German spy network in Brazil, which may have passed some kind of alert to the German Navy. 2 hours later, further south, Chart fired 2 torpedoes at the Araraquara, sinking it quickly and killing 131 of its 142 passengers. Continuing his hunt, at 9:13 in the morning, he torpedoed the ship Aníbal Benevolo, which was carrying 154 people. Only 4 survived. The next day, August 17th, at 3:49 in the afternoon, Chart torpedoed the Itagiba, a ship that was carrying the rest of the 7th Pack Artillery Group to Recife. Hit by just 1 torpedo, it sank slowly, allowing 145 of its 181 crew members to survive. Some survivors were rescued by the ship Arara, which was sunk 18 hours and 3 minutes later, killing 20 of its 36 crew members. In less than 48 hours, 5 Brazilian ships had been sunk, resulting in the deaths of a total of 607 people. When news of these sinkings reached the media, the population became furious and protested in the streets of Rio de Janeiro, immediately demanding a declaration of war. Therefore, on August 22nd at the Catete Palace, Getulio Vargas officially announced that Brazil was in a state of war against Germany and Italy. But look how curious that is. On the same 22nd, sailing near Salvador, right next to the Itapua lighthouse. And it was there that he sank a Swedish freighter called Hamaren. So here's my question for you. If it was the Americans who sank the Brazilian ships that week, then they also sank that Swedish ship to force Sweden to enter the war. Out of curiosity, during World War II, neutral Sweden lost 88 ships. Could this be an American phantom war to force the country to enter the conflict? Or simply we can look at the German records and see that all 88 are registered there. So here are the words of Admiral Karl Dönitz himself, commander of the German submarine force and, from 43 on, commander of the Kriegsmarine, in his memoir, 10 years and 20 days. Okay, I have it. Let's go. There was also a chance of operations along Brazil's coast. Our political relations with that country had been deteriorating more and more for some time, and orders from the Naval High Command regarding our attitude toward Brazilian shipping became stricter accordingly. On January 27, 1942, as a result of the state of war that existed between us and the United States, Brazil broke off diplomatic relations with us. Until then, no Brazilian ship had been sunk by a German submarine. Between February and April 1942, our submarines torpedoed and sank 7 Brazilian ships. Since they had every right to do so, as the captains failed to establish their neutral status, they sailed without lights and in a zigzag pattern, some armed and painted gray, and without the national flag. After that, more and more Brazilian ships installed weapons until their entire fleet was armed. At the end of May, the Brazilian Ministry of Aeronautics announced that all Brazilian aircraft were attacking Axis submarines, and they would continue to do so without any formal declaration. We were then at war with Brazil, and on July 4th, the U-boats received orders from our political leadership to attack all Brazilian ships. And there's more, look at this. On the other side of the straits, between Africa and South America, operated the U-507 under Corvette Captain Shar. Out there outside territorial waters, he sank 5 Brazilian ships. He followed instructions he received, approved by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the High Command of the Armed Forces. The Brazilian government took these sinkings as a reason to declare war against Germany. This didn't affect our existing relations with Brazil, which was already involved in hostile actions against us. Bringing Brazil to an official declaration was clearly a mistake. Politically, we should have been advised to avoid this. The commander of the submarines, however, and the captain of the U-boat in question, as members of the armed forces, had no choice but to obey the orders they had received. It was not up to them to weigh and measure the political consequences. Well, folks, is that clear? The words of Dönitz are unequivocal. Deteriorating relations between Brazil and Germany in early 1942 led to escalating hostilities and the declaration of war in August. The documentary Evidence Review aligns with this analysis because Brazil's increasing strategic involvement with the United States and its consequent distancing from Germany and Italy led to rising tensions, which led to belligerence in the end. And to the documents are added the physical evidence. 11 Axis submarines were sunk off the Brazilian coast, including the U-513 found near Santa Catarina years ago. All 11 were lost off the Brazilian coast. It's very hard not to recognize that a large-scale naval effort had been mounted against us. The hard part is denying the authorship of a crime to someone who never denied having committed those acts. In other words, the German Navy and the Italian Navy have kept records since that time of all the sinkings of Brazilian ships that they themselves carried out. And all of this is available for consultation on the internet. In fact, I'll leave some links here in the description. And if you like this video, come on, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you can get notifications. As soon as I post more videos, I'll be here. Thank you once again for watching, and here's a big hug from SDG.